Throughout history, few figures have generated as many questions, debates, and divisions as Jesus of Nazareth. For some, he was simply a Jewish teacher. For others, a prophet. For millions, the Son of God. But before talking about faith, miracles, or beliefs, there is a fundamental question that must be answered first. Did Jesus really exist, or was he just a religious invention? Today we are not going to appeal to emotions. We are not going to ask you to believe without thinking. In this video, we are going to do something different. We are going to analyze history, ancient documents, records from the time, sources that survived the passage of time. Because there is a truth few people mention. The existence of Jesus is not only a Christian belief. It is a historical fact recognized even by people who did not believe in him. Rome did not execute myths. Historians did not record legends as real events. And empires do not persecute empty ideas. If Jesus had never existed, his name would have been lost to time. But the opposite happened. His impact was so profound that it divided history in two. Before him, and after him. This is not a video to impose faith. It is a video to present evidence. And as we move forward, you will discover something crucial. The Christian faith was not born from fantasy. It was born from real events, in real places, involving real people. Today we will examine historical evidence that no serious historian can ignore. And in the end, we will not tell you what to believe. We will simply show you what happened. Because one thing is certain. Jesus was not invented. And history confirms it. When people talk about Jesus, one idea is constantly repeated. An idea that sounds logical, but does not withstand historical analysis. Many say that if the Bible is a religious book, then everything it says about Jesus is just faith. But that statement is based on a fundamental mistake. The Bible is not a single book. It is a collection of texts written over more than 1,000 years. By different authors. In different historical contexts. And for different audiences. Within this collection, the Gospels occupy a key place. And here is something many people do not know. The Gospels were not written as myths. They were written as testimonies. In the ancient world, myths were not placed in specific dates. They did not mention real rulers. They did not name verifiable cities. And they did not risk being disproven by living witnesses. The Gospels do the exact opposite. They mention Pontius Pilate. They mention Herod. They mention Emperor Tiberius. They place events in Jerusalem, Galilee, and Judea. And they describe public events. That is not mythological language. That is historical language. Furthermore, the first Christians were not trying to create a new religion. They were proclaiming something they claimed to have seen. If Jesus had not existed, the message would have collapsed in its place of origin. Jerusalem was a small city. The events happened there. And witnesses were still alive when these accounts began to circulate. Inventing a non-existent character in that context would have been impossible to sustain. Another important detail. The Gospels do not glorify their protagonists. They show fear, doubt, failure. Peter denies Jesus. The disciples flee. Thomas doubts. Invented stories seek to exalt. Real testimonies do not hide weaknesses. Here is the central error. Confusing faith with the absence of history. The Christian faith was not born from ignorance. It was born from events that occurred in time. First, there was a life. Then a death. After that, an impact impossible to ignore. Reducing Jesus to a myth is not a critical position. It is a misunderstanding of how history is constructed. And now that we understand this error, we are ready to move forward. Because not only Christians spoke about Jesus. In the next section, we will see what Roman historians said. And there, history will speak without faith involved. If Jesus had been only a religious myth, his name would appear only in Christian texts. But history shows us something very different. There are ancient documents written by historians who were not Christians. They did not follow Jesus. And in some cases, they even despised Christianity. And yet, they mentioned him. This is crucial. Because when an external source confirms a fact, historical evidence becomes stronger. Let us begin with Flavius Josephus. Josephus was a 1st century Jewish historian. He wrote for Rome. He did not believe Jesus was the Messiah. And he had no interest in defending Christians. In his work Jewish Antiquities, he mentions Jesus of Nazareth. He speaks of a wise man, acknowledges that he had many followers, and states that he was condemned to crucifixion under the government of Pontius Pilate. This is fundamental. Josephus was not promoting faith. He was recording facts. Now let us move to Rome. Tacitus, one of the most respected Roman historians of antiquity, writes in his annals about the persecution of Christians under Emperor Nero. And he states something decisive. He affirms that Christ was executed during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, by order of Pontius Pilate. Tacitus despised Christianity. He considered it a dangerous superstition. And yet, he did not deny Christ. He did not deny the crucifixion. He did not deny the historical origin of the Christian movement. For Rome, Jesus was not a legend. He was a real, executed man. Another important testimony is that of Pliny the Younger. Pliny was a Roman governor, an official of the empire. In a letter to Emperor Trajan, he describes Christians and explains how they gathered. He says they sang hymns to Christ as to a god. This happens only a few decades after the crucifixion. The existence of Jesus was not in question. What concerned Rome was the rapid spread of his followers. There is also Suetonius, a Roman historian who mentions disturbances in Rome caused by followers of someone called Christus. Although brief, his reference confirms the early impact of Jesus on the empire. These men did not share beliefs. They did not write together. They had no common interests. But they agreed on the essentials. Jesus existed. He was executed. And his movement spread rapidly. This is pure history. Rome did not persecute an imaginary idea. It persecuted a fact. And this brings us to the next proof. Because there is one point where almost all historians agree. The crucifixion of Jesus. There is a point in history where nearly all historians agree. Whether they believe in God or not. Whether they accept the Christian faith or not. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. This is not a minor detail. Crucifixion was a real, public, and brutal punishment used exclusively by the Roman Empire. Rome did not crucify ideas. It crucified real people. And here is what matters. The crucifixion of Jesus does not appear only in the Bible. It appears in Roman sources. It appears in Jewish sources. It appears in texts written by people with no interest in defending Christianity. Let us return to Tacitus. He writes that Christ was executed under the authority of Pontius Pilate during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. He does not say Christians believed Jesus died. He says he was executed. That is history, not theology. Now let us think about Pontius Pilate. For a long time, some claimed Pilate was a biblical invention. Until archaeology spoke. A Roman inscription was discovered bearing his name, identifying him as prefect of Judea. The Bible said he existed. History confirmed it. And if Pilate existed, if he governed Judea, if he ordered executions, then the crucifixion of Jesus fits perfectly within its historical context. Now let us move to Jewish sources. The Talmud mentions that Jesus was executed on the eve of Passover. It does not try to justify it. It does not try to deny it. It presents it as a fact. This is important. The enemies of Jesus did not deny his death. They only debated its meaning. That happens when a fact cannot be erased. Now a key question arises. If Jesus never existed, Why invent such a humiliating death? In the ancient world, a crucified Messiah was a total contradiction. For Jews, the cross was a sign of curse. For Romans, the most shameful punishment. If the disciples had invented the story, they would have chosen glory and victory. Not a cross. The cross does not strengthen a lie. The cross destroys an invention. The Bible does not soften Jesus' death. It does not beautify it. It does not hide it. It presents it exactly as it was. Because it is not constructing a myth. It is reporting a fact. Jesus was arrested. He was tried. He was condemned. And he was crucified. That is history. In the next section, we will enter even more uncomfortable territory. Because we will talk about the Gospels as historical documents. And there, the evidence becomes even harder to ignore. When people talk about Jesus, many repeat the same claim. They say the Gospels are just stories. That they were written long afterward. And that they cannot be considered history. But that idea does not withstand historical analysis. The Gospels did not appear centuries later. They were written within the 1st century. That means something crucial. They were written while eyewitnesses were still alive. People who saw. People who heard. People who could confirm or deny what was written. Matthew was a direct disciple. John walked with Jesus. Mark wrote under Peter's testimony. Luke carefully investigated eyewitnesses. This is not uncontrolled oral tradition. It is testimony close to the events. Now let us compare this with other historical figures. Alexander the Great has biographies written more than 300 years after his death. Julius Caesar is known through copies made decades and centuries later. And yet, no one seriously questions their existence. So an uncomfortable question arises. Why do we demand from the Gospels a level of proof we do not demand from other ancient texts? Let us continue with another key fact. The number of manuscripts. There are thousands of ancient copies of the New Testament, some dating only decades after the originals. This does not exist for any other ancient document. Homer's Iliad has fewer manuscripts and with centuries between the original and the copies. And yet, it is accepted as a historical source. From an academic perspective, the Gospels are extraordinarily well preserved. Now let us think about the content. The Gospels do not glorify their authors. They show doubt, failure, fear. Peter denies Jesus. The disciples flee. Thomas doubts. Legends embellish. Real testimonies do not hide weaknesses. Furthermore, the Gospels include verifiable details. Names of real rulers. Real cities. Accurate Jewish and Roman customs. Everything fits the historical context of the 1st century. If these texts had been invented centuries later, these details would not match. But they do. Here is the historical conclusion. If we reject the Gospels as historical sources, we would have to discard much of ancient history. Because they meet, and exceed, the criteria used to accept other documents. The problem is not the evidence. The problem is what accepting it implies. Because recognizing the Gospels as history not only confirms that Jesus existed, it confronts us with who he was. And that leads us to the next proof. Because no false story survives persecution, torture, and death. In the next section, we will talk about the disciples. And why they were willing to die for what they claimed to have seen. So far, we have spoken about documents, ancient texts, historical records. But now we come to an even stronger proof. The lives, and the deaths, of those who claimed to have seen Jesus with their own eyes. The disciples did not preach an abstract idea. They did not defend a philosophical theory. They claimed something concrete. That Jesus lived. That he was crucified. And that he rose again. And for that claim, they died. This point is crucial. Throughout history, many people have died for false ideas. But there is a fundamental difference. Those people believed what they defended was true. The disciples were in a different position. If Jesus had not existed, if the story had been invented, they would have known. They did not receive the message secondhand. They did not hear it centuries later. They claimed to have walked with Jesus, to have eaten with him, to have spoken with him after the crucifixion. So an inevitable question arises. Why would someone die for something they know is a lie? Peter was executed. Paul was beheaded. James was killed. Thomas died far from his homeland, proclaiming the same message. They did not die together. They did not die on the same day. They did not die under the same authority. They were persecuted in different places, by different governments, at different times. And yet, none of them recanted their testimony. This destroys the idea of a conspiracy. Conspiracies collapse under fear, under pressure, under the threat of death. Here, the opposite happened. The more they were persecuted, the more the message spread. Now consider what they gained. They did not gain power. They did not gain wealth. They did not gain prestige. They were imprisoned, beaten, rejected. If they had sought personal benefit, they would have abandoned the message. But they did not. Because they were not defending an idea. They were defending an encounter. They were not protecting a cold doctrine. They were testifying to something that transformed their lives. From a historical perspective, this behavior has only one coherent explanation. They deeply believed what they proclaimed was real. And this brings us to the final proof. Because when a message is silenced by an empire, and fails, it is because that message has already changed history. There is a proof no document can erase. No empire could stop. And no century could extinguish the historical impact of Jesus. Because one thing is that someone existed. And another very different thing is that his life changed the course of the world. Jesus wrote no books. He led no armies. He held no political office. And yet, his name divided history in two. Before Christ. After Christ. The calendar changed. Laws changed. The way we understand human dignity changed. Hospitals, orphanages, universities, justice movements. All of this emerged from a message born on a cross. Rome tried to erase his name. It persecuted his followers, threw them into arenas, executed them publicly. And it failed. Because you cannot silence something anchored in history. If Jesus had not existed, Christianity would have disappeared under persecution. Lies do not survive pain. Myths do not withstand death. But the opposite happened. The more they tried to extinguish it, the more it spread. From a small region in the Middle East to the ends of the earth. Here is the truth that makes many uncomfortable. Denying the divinity of Jesus may be a personal position. But denying his existence is to go against history itself. Documents confirm it. Historians record it. Enemies acknowledged it. And impact proves it. This video did not seek to tell you what to believe. It sought to show you what happened. Jesus was not invented. Jesus was not a myth. Jesus was a real person. And his life left a mark no power could erase. History confirms it. Now, the decision is yours. Because when a name survives empires, centuries, and persecution, it is not by chance. Jesus did exist. And history was never able to silence him.